Let's do Q&A today. If you can hear the sounds of Bob the Builder in the background, that's because my boys are watching Bob the Builder. I'm like down here because, well, up here you're like, oh, I guess that's not too bad. I was gonna say, here's chop my head off, but that's not too bad. My little stand is struggling. Like, I keep putting it up here and it's like, no. I'm like, no, up here. And it's like, no. Cool. So, answer 2 questions today. And our 2 questions are, why are we out of chocolate? That's the number 1 question. No. Okay. What other authors are you friends with? And how do they help you become a better writer? Right out of the gate. And what is your favorite childhood book? Okay. We're going to go in reverse order because the first one is easier. And I think the second one, my brain needs a second to sort that out. So what is your favorite childhood book? My favorite childhood book from when I was, we'll do 2. And just book. Not series, just book. Okay? Because if we're going to add series in there, this makes this considerably more complicated. My favorite childhood book was The Foot Book by Dr. Seuss. When I was an actual child. I loved that book. I loved that book so much that I actually memorized the entire book and was so proud of myself that I could read, that I read it to my entire first grade class on the back page upside down in front of the whole class. My teacher was like, Donica, did you memorize this? I was like, no. She's like, oh, interesting. Book is completely upside down and I'm on the last page. There's not even words on it. It's just the little guy with his like left foot, right foot walking thing. So that was, as an actual child, that was my favorite book. When I was in middle school, which technically is still a child, but we're getting into the preteen era, getting a little bit older. The book that I think influenced me a ton was The 2 Princesses of Bamarre by, what is her name? Gail. Her name just went completely out of my mind. It's the same lady that wrote Ella Enchanted. Anyway, I have the book in my room. I'll write down in the description the name of the author. In case you're interested in reading it. It's so good. But that was the first book I ever remember, so my introduction to it was my 7th grade English teacher who looked like Stevie Nicks, coolest looking lady ever. She was reading that book to our class, just as a class. She was reading the story to us. And I was obsessed. I wanted the story, so much so that I actually bothered my mom until we had the Scholastic Book Fair, this one of the weeks, while we were reading this book. And I was like, Mom, we have to get this book. And so I got it. And Gail Levine, is that her name? Anyway, I got the book and I read it, and it was the first book I remember rereading. I read a bunch of books all the time. I read a ton of books, but I don't ever remember wanting to revisit a story. I remember reading it and being like, cool, that was awesome. Let's move on to the next thing. That was the first story that I reread and reread and reread. I was obsessed with the story. I was the kid who wanted to be Meryl, but I identified way more with Addie. I was terrified of everything. And so I always joke that my mom instilled a lot of Hispanic panic in me, so much so that you can give me any object and I can tell you at least 8 ways that it can kill you. This has served me well. I have never died. And I've kept all of my children alive. No one has died from anything because my Hispanic panic is strong. So it's serving me well, but it does make for very nervous. It makes for a very nervous person. And so I loved the story of Addie, kind of having to step it up and like get over herself and get over her fears and like have to be the strong one and own it and not lose who she was. But by overcoming her nervous side and her anxious side and realizing, yep, you know what? Life is full of risks and sometimes you just got to suck it up and you got to do it. And with her realizing that, she actually was able to become more of who she was, like unleash the strength that she had inside of her. While like she still keeps her softness, she still keeps her femininity, she still keeps all of the things that make her essentially Addie, without watering it down because she was too scared of what would happen if she let it all out, kind of thing. So that was my favorite book, The Two Princesses of Bamarre. When you ask me what was your favorite book, like what's your favorite story, what's your favorite book, I will almost always answer The Two Princesses of Bamarre because it shaped me. Like I loved that story so much. And then the foot book. Okay. What other authors are you friends with and how do they help you become a better writer? This one's kind of tricky for me because I feel like my friendship with other authors has really only started in the last couple of years. I was on Instagram, but I wasn't on Instagram. I didn't even know there was like a writer community on Instagram. I didn't even know that existed. Writers, we have a tendency to be kind of lone wolves so to speak, because writing is not usually something that like you do in a crowd, right? Like if you're on a soccer team, you can't exactly play soccer alone. You have to have a team in order to like participate in games. If you play water polo, you can't exactly do it alone. You got to have a team, right? But I feel like reading and writing are these things that we can absolutely do it alone. And you can do it with other people, right? My husband and I actually met in a writing class. And so probably the other author that I am the most friends with, is my husband. I don't think that he would define himself as an author because his books might still be for sale. He had them on, what's it called now? I think it's changed its name. But he had the ebooks available for sale on, like, I can't think. One of these websites. And I think he still has them for sale. He hasn't done any kind of like, marketing or anything for them. But so I consider him an author. I think he would consider himself more a playwright currently because that's where his focus is on his writing is writing plays. But I feel like he's got a really, analytical mind. And he has a tendency to ask me really good kind of hard questions where I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to throw magic on it. Like that, like that's always the joke. So he writes science fiction and I write fantasy. And my joke with him is always like, you have to know these things because you're science fiction. Like you got to make it make sense. I can pull a handful of glitter out of my pocket and go, it's magic, and like run away. Because I write fantasy. But because he asks me those kinds of questions, it makes me think like into my own lore a little bit more of like, well, wait a minute, why does this work this way? How come we do it this way, right? And not just leave it at glitter and it's magic and then me running away. My other author friends, the ones I have made more recently, Nicole Adair, Madeline Elizabeth, Kelly McPherson all come to mind immediately because they all have books out and they have all in one way or another answered my many, many, many questions about like, how do I do this? How do I do that? All of them have been instrumental in me deciding to self-publish. All of them are self-published. And when I initially was like, yeah, I should start like posting some stuff on Instagram and stuff about writing. Cause I that's my next focus, right? Is getting my book out. I was not even thinking about self-publishing until I came across Nicole, and Nicole connected me with Maddie, and somewhere in there I found Kelly, and they're all publishing on their own. And I was like, oh, like, we can do that? Like, I mean, I had heard of it in the sense of like, oh yeah, I'll pay a bunch of money to this printer and then they'll send me 10,000 copies of my book. And now I have to figure out how to get people to actually buy them. But print on demand, I had never even heard of it. And I didn't know you could do it through Amazon. I didn't know I didn't know what a proof copy was. I didn't know like what beta readers were. I was very much just going based off of what I knew about writing from what I knew from college. And then I knew I was going to need some kind of editor. I knew I was going to encounter like having to figure out a title, having to figure out what the book cover is going to look like. But none of these things I thought I was going to have to figure it out. I thought like, well, I'll just get an agent and the agent will help me find a publisher. And then the publisher will help figure all that stuff out. Like, I don't know. I'm just here to tell a story. And being friends with them, watching them go through their journeys, watching them publish their books, reading their books and being like, oh my gosh, these are so good. Like, these are so good. And realizing that, hey, maybe I could do this too. They all worked with somebody else, as far as I know, to actually create their covers. I didn't. And maybe some people will look at this and be like, yeah, I can tell. But I feel like when you see all 5 books together, you're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. Why she did it this way. And I'm also very much of the opinion, specifically while self-publishing, that I can always change it later, right? This is going to be the cover page for A Change of Tide. But I do like the idea of doing an omnibus, and I don't have it in here right now. I think I put it away. Doing an omnibus where it is all 5 books in one big book and having like a really fancy cover for that. And probably that one I might actually like find somebody to do like character art for. I think that would be really cool. But that's years out. Anyway, but being friends with them, watching them go through their journeys, watching them being so willing to answer all of my many, many questions has changed the way I approached writing, has changed the way I approached publishing, and like gave me like a better foothold for, hey, you can do this yourself, right? Like you don't have to wait for anybody else to say that your book is good. You get to decide. And that was terrifying and super empowering at the same time, because being the one to be like, okay, it's done. There's always a little piece in the back of my head that's like, but is it though? Because like you could change this and you could change this. And what if you added this? And oh my gosh, you just thought of this and that would be so cute. And you could add that in and stop. We're done. We'll add it into book 2. But anyway, it changed. It changed a lot in my writing process. So I think they've helped me become a better writer, because I feel kind of pushed to kind of rise to the occasion, so to speak. Like, I've read their books and they're so good. And I'm like, I feel there are some comparisons I feel like are unhealthy, and there's some comparisons that I feel are healthy. And I feel like this particular comparison was made from a healthy place of like, I don't want to just publish garbage. I don't know if that makes sense. But like reviewing, trying to look at my book through brand new, fresh eyes of like never having read this before. Do I stand up? Do I measure up? Or do I have a lot more work to do? Right? Like if this still reads like a first draft, I need to know, right? I need to be able to compare it to these writers that I look up to and be able to say, this still needs a lot of work. So like rereading draft book 2 right here. This is draft 1 of book 2. Rereading this, I'm like, oh yeah, this needs a lot of work. And I can see that. And it's not out of a like, oh, I'm never going to be as good as them kind of place. It's a, I know I can get this to a really good place. It's not there yet. So let's get to work, you know? And so I feel like that's been massively beneficial. And one of the biggest things that I think has helped me become a better writer in having author friends is just kind of feeling a little validated, feeling a little seen with some of these, like, there's all these jokes about like, we never do our laundry because I'm sorry, I'm busy writing, like, or we burn dinner all the time because, oh, I just got an idea for that chapter. And just kind of feeling seen, especially being a mom and a writer and also the publisher and the marketing. And like when you're doing it yourself, you're doing it yourself. And so it's been really powerful to be able to have people to kind of look to, kind of as examples and also for guidance. And then also kind of having kind of mentorship, and friendship, where I feel like I can get help, but I can also just get encouragement if that's all I need. And we can kind of lean on each other. And that's been really fun. I did not anticipate that. I did not anticipate that when I very first decided to start posting stuff on the internet about being a writer. I did not anticipate finding, like brand new people like that would become my friends. One of these days we'll actually meet in person and that would be amazing. But anyway, that's it for today's Q&A.